maybe I paid good money for the lessons that I've learned, and one thing about those lessons is they're mine and I paid for them.
Welcome to the Rivers and Tides podcast, where we have guests on to discuss stories of healing and resiliency through outdoor pursuits. Nathaniel Linville, thank you for coming on the podcast today and hosting us in your fly shop, the angling company.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I guess I want to start out by saying congratulations on winning the Gold Cup Tarpon Tournament.
Thanks. That's how I ended up doing this.
Pretty big accomplishment. Yeah, that's right. You said if I win the tournament, I'll do the podcast. So here we are.
That's true. It seemed rather abstract at the time, but yeah.
So for not everyone that sees this podcast is going to necessarily know anything about fly fishing. So the Gold Cup Tarpon Tournament, is it fair to say that that's the Super Bowl of tarpon fly fishing tournaments?
Yeah, I mean it's the one that is it's been going on the longest. This was I think it was its 61st year was this year. And there's three major tarpon tournaments and a couple other ones that are, I'm not going to say they're not major. They're difficult to win, but the Gold Cup is the one that is the most popular and people want to.
That's the pinnacle, ultimate, everyone shoots for eventually.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you want to win one, if you're going to win one, that's, I think, the one to win. Yeah.
So, I was watching day by day. I'd go in and see what the scores were, and you guys were in the lead up until the last day. You weren't, though, starting out, were you?
No.
So what was it like that day? Did you feel, was there pressure? Like,
no, Rich, there was no pressure. I just went out there and had fun.
Yeah, no worries. We're behind.
No, that's like the worst feeling in competitive sport, right? Is being in front and then watching a lead evaporate.
You were in front every day.
Every day until day 4. So we caught 2 on day 1, and then we caught 1 on day 2, and then nothing on day 3 and 4. And your phone goes from delivering messages like, "Hey man, good work, keep it up. I know you got this," which is its own kind of unhelpful, to like nothing on Thursday night. Like, and that everyone that was looking at the scores being like, "Hey man, a friend or whatever."
They're like, "Oh shit, they're behind.
I'm not going to say anything now," and you're just sitting there, and it's a.
Where are you now?
Oh, it's horrible. It really is. And I was sick the whole week. But look, it's hard, and that's a very difficult time to perform, even if you've done it a lot. And even if you know what you're doing, it's really hard not to get tight. And we caught a fish early on day 5, which put us theoretically into first. Like, we could have won. And then we lost a big one in the afternoon. So we were sure that we had lost. It wasn't like a great feeling. But then you get back and then you find out slowly that, other people didn't do as well. And
when you don't, in a tournament like that, when you have days like that where you don't find fish, does the guide start to feel?
Well, we found fish. I mean,
or you don't catch any.
Yeah. Those are different things.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I would say that we actually had a good number of opportunities, but it was just sometimes you leave in the morning in conditions like that, and you just think, what are we doing, man? We have to go find them. And it's not like there's fish everywhere. So you have to find them, and then you have to get them to bite. And when the conditions are like that, the fish aren't really excited to bite. And then every fish we hooked fought like a bastard because it was the water was really choppy, and there was it just seemed like there was so much daylight between where we were and where we wanted to be. Yeah, and it shows it, right? I mean, you go out and you fish for 2 days, you don't catch anything. I mean, it's not like we weren't trying.
Yeah, and it's not like you're not two guys at the pinnacle of the sport.
Oh, I mean, look, we've worked really hard for that purpose, and it's so hard when it's slipping away, and it never is like you want it to be.
So I guess I'm curious. Take me inside. What's a day like in a tournament like that? From like start to finish. What's it like to be in a tournament like that? If you can put into words.
Well, each day is different.
Obviously, different when you're in the lead as opposed to when you're behind.
There's the emotional part of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you go out day one and you have good fishing and things come together and you build on a lead, I've won tournaments that I felt great about, and we kind of knew on the last day, like, we probably pulled it off and it was easy going. And then I've won tournaments where you feel like you got lucky and it was maybe the misfortune of other people that caused you to win. But I mean, in general, the goal for me as an angler is not to think too much about what the stakes are.
Do you and the guide?
That's hard.
Yeah. Do you and the guides do you have a game plan? Do you discuss a game plan and a strategy, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, we're very careful to divide the job up. So Ian's job is to take us where he thinks we have the best chance of catching a fish, and my job is to hook that fish and then fight it in such a way that he can grab it. His job is to grab it, and then we hopefully do it again.
And Ian Slater is your guide. Sorry for the people that are watching.
Ian's the guy in those tournaments that I'm fishing with, and he's an incredible fishing guide and a really close friend, just an awesome human being. I mean, I can't say enough about him. But yeah, I mean, that's so really, he might say to me, hey, I'm thinking about going here, but I'm not really sure. And I'm kind of just staying neutral,
Focused on what you have to do.
Well, and he's not asking me because he really wants my opinion. He's just talking out loud, the same way that I would talk to him about a fly change. Like I'm just kind of sending those words out so I can hear them back to myself. But it's rare that Ian would say, in fact, I don't think he's ever said, hey, I think we really should change. This is what we have to do. I mean, he's been a little forward about it and said, look, I believe strongly we should go to a different color or a different size or something. But we try to divide the labor up. And I think we do a good job of that. I don't think I spend much time on the back of the boat. He doesn't spend much time in the front. So we make that pretty easy.
In a tournament like that, I'm curious because I know in a lot of sporting events and sports in general, you've got teams that are your rivals. You've got teams where there's some bad blood maybe. Is there, in that type of a tournament, what's the atmosphere amongst the teams? Is there some animosity? Is there some certain people that, and not asking for specific names, of course, just in general, just curious what the dynamic is like that.
I mean, I've had my share of disagreements with people and conflict. None of it, I would say, is major. None of it's been lasting. I don't think any of it really exists now. Any issues that I've had with people are pretty much in the past. But some of that's normal. I mean, you're going to have people...
It's competition, right?
Yeah, and look, it's a bunch of people trying to win, and I mean, sometimes you're just really pissed off because things aren't working and you're frustrated and you take it out on someone and maybe you shouldn't, and maybe they should have handled it better, and then all of a sudden it flares up. But there doesn't seem to be any lasting stuff to that.
Yeah.
And there's always, scuffles and shit, but it's never amounts to much in the tournaments. I think people are pretty good about that nowadays. There's a lot more talk about it than real, I mean, I don't think anyone's ever come to blows over it. I mean, the guys will tell you that back in the day it used to happen, but
it's always back in the day.
Yeah, exactly.
They were a little saltier.
We used
back
to punch each other every 5 seconds. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've heard stories of back in the day, people coming down here or people going to Alamorada from out of town and not doing their, getting trailer tires slashed and all kinds of stories back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, in all the time I've been down here, like I've heard a couple stories about like one dude slapped another guy. Someone left a piece of cheese on someone's windshield. Like that's
pretty benign.
That's just the reality. I mean, I don't know that anyone's actually like hurt another person like seriously, or if any real property damage has taken place.
Well, that's cool. I mean, and we'll talk about everything that you put into winning these tournaments and the records that you hold, because I think it's incredible and it's part of your bigger story. And before we do that, though, I just want to back up and get a little bit of history Where are you from originally?
I grew up in a town called Norwalk, Connecticut.
Okay. Yeah, not too far from where I am on Long Island, I don't think. Yeah.
Yeah, right across from like Cold Spring Harbor.
Yeah, very much. I think we used to play them in lacrosse back in the day.
I'm sure people in that part of the world love lacrosse.
Yes, it was a big thing.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it still is.
And that's where you went to high school?
No, I went to a bunch of different schools around. I went to, I think like 6 or 7 different, from maybe 9th grade through my senior year, or what would have been my senior year of high school. I did a lot of like trying to, apply to programs to go spend like a couple months on a farm, like doing work and trying to learn about environmental science. Or I did part of a year abroad. And I just think that was a product of being sort of unhappy and thinking that stuff was going to make me happier. And then I got kicked out my senior year. And then I went to college for, I think, part of a year after that, and then dropped out.
So, a big part of your story is your history with drug use. And if we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I love talking about drugs.
When did,
Ask me anything.
When did that start for you?
I would say high school. It started, like, I was probably 16, somewhere in there.
Do you remember, was it just experimental, or I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think you had depression at the time or anxiety? Were you trying to deal with something like that, or was it just more of an experimental thing?
I mean, I think that, I've had that like cause in my life to answer this question a few times, and it's a difficult one because I don't think that, my drug use started out as a response to depression or anxiety that other people don't have. I think it was more like the ordinary course of life includes things like depression, anxiety, all these things, right? It's not just depressed people that can feel depressed. It's not just people that have anxiety disorder that feel anxious. But I think it's more that I struggled to deal with a normal level of those things more than having a higher level of them to begin with. And maybe that's a pointless distinction to make, but I do think it's an important one, because I think to say that I had a bunch of issues at home or that I was unhappy kind of isn't, I think I was just ill-equipped to deal with normal stuff. And look, high school's not a very kind time in life for people typically,
Oh, I know. I've got kids I have a daughter that definitely had a hard time.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like, kids are cruel, and you're learning a lot about other people, and a lot of what you learn about other people is not great, and so I don't know, for me, it was not that there was this deficiency of like happiness in me. It was more that I didn't have the ability to handle discomfort or anxiety or, whatever the negative feelings were at the time. And it also didn't start right away. I mean, you can't look at, once a hurricane's a hurricane, it's obvious. But once, you go back far enough and it's like, well, okay, so how did you know, that it was going to be a Cat 5? And I think it's just, you don't really know. And it's a series of random things to a degree, but there's underlying conditions that let it happen. And I think that those conditions are not always causative. But at a certain point, you kind of end up where you end up.
And what did it
sense?
Yeah, it does. There's no easy of why it started. Is basically it's a culmination of different things.
Yeah.
And what did it start with? I mean, what?
Well, that's a pretty typical. I mean, you don't start out like shooting heroin,
right? Yeah,
that's not the way it usually goes. I would say that I followed a pretty natural progression of substances from, alcohol, weed to pharmaceutical drugs to then cocaine, oxy, those things. That was the sort of, progression for me.
And over what kind of a time period are we talking here?
So I started getting high when I was probably 16. And then maybe in earnest when I was 18, 19 type thing. I mean, I don't know exactly. And then I got clean when I was 28. So,
And when you started to, where were you living chronologically, kind of along with the use? Where were you living throughout those times? Were you moving around?
yeah, a lot.
Okay.
I mean, Connecticut, then I was with this girl. I lived overseas for a little bit. Then I was back in New York, then down to Key West, then back to New York, then out to LA, then back to Key West. So pretty aimless.
And how were you, were you working, how were you funding your,
Well, so I was, my grandparents had left me some money and I was basically burning through all of it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Which is, it's something that I've definitely come to terms with, but it's also like, what a pointless, it's either a pointless way to have spent a bunch of money that I'll never get back, or I paid a really high price for a really top-notch lesson to have learned, that I'll have with me for the rest of my life. And I think when I first sort of realized the effect that I'd had and the negative, like impact of the way I'd been living, I felt a lot more like the first one. Like, what a shame, and what an asshole, and what a terrible thing, and honestly, it's just such a obvious thing, right? Like some fucking spooner gets some money and puts it all up his nose and wastes it. Like, there's so many people in the world that would need that or would benefit from that. And what a shame,
But it's hard to see any of that.
Well, no, that's how I felt when I got clean, like a complete and total failure. But then later I felt like, hey, maybe I paid good money for the lessons that I've learned. And one thing about those lessons is they're mine and I paid for them. And that's kind of how I feel about it more now. Like, take some ownership of the mistakes that I made and not just sit on the nail and think I'm just a total piece of shit about it.
And when you're using you don't think about any of that stuff.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I'm saying this is all like all the introspection comes post. No, you're not sitting there like, oh, I'm a piece of shit for doing this. You think you're great. That's part of the condition, right? You don't think there's anything wrong.
And is that how you felt as things progressed, that you weren't an addict? Did you not think you were?
No, I didn't. I mean, I would say that I never really thought about what a drug addict was, but I was sure that I was not that. But you spend some time around people who are addicts and in recovery, and then you realize, like, oh shit, I check a lot of these boxes.
Were you functioning? I mean, as far as like day-to-day stuff, or
not really?
No.
I mean, I opened the business and then I basically took all the money out of the business. So for the first year the business was open, it was,
funding drug.
It was funding my drug use, yeah, and I was taking all the money out of it, so the inventory was going down. I mean, you can't. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't take a genius in retail to realize that if you just take all the money that comes in and burn it,
you can't resupply.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, you were resupplying yourself, but Correct. You weren't resupplying the store.
But yeah, so that was like the first. But I would say functional. Like, no, not really.
And how was this? What was your relationship like with your family during all this? I mean, it was
really strained.
Were they telling you, hey, you've got a problem?
Well, no, because I had really done a good job of convincing them that I had other problems, like mental problems, behavioral problems, and I'd been diagnosed by people with these other issues. And that's very common for people that have substance abuse, is an underlying disorder. The effects of addiction really mimic depression, anxiety, bipolar. So if you're not honest about your drug use, you are depressed, you are anxious, and you do have bipolar, essentially. And so I'd sort of convinced myself and my family that I had this host of mental disorders, and that I was very unique in how fucked up I was, and that nothing, but that was part of the story that I told myself, and then part of what I told them. But look, those relationships are strained by the time I got clean, and with good reason. I mean, that was not good for anybody, I wasn't a great son or brother or anything. So it's not surprising that those relationships were strained the way they were.
So at one point, your family took over the store. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I basically did not have control over the business at all. And my mother particularly, or my family collectively, but my mother especially, owned the business it was years after I got clean. It was probably, I don't know exactly when that stopped, but it was probably 8 years, I would think.
Were you still using when she took it over?
No.
You had quit by then.
I got clean.
When did you realize it's a hurricane?
It's a good question. I have to sort of be careful about talking about 12-step recovery and programs that the second word of which is anonymous. But there's a reading that some people would read every time you go to a meeting, and it would say 1 is too many and 1,000's never enough. And I used to go to meetings and I would think I don't need to be here.
I'm not what these people say.
Yeah, or I'm just going to do it until, and no one's telling me this. No one's telling me that I'm an addict. I'm sort of left to my own devices to try to figure it out. And I remember reading that and remembering a couple of experiences in my life with drugs where that really was the case, where if I did one, it was just, I was on for days. And I remember getting so much at one point that I was like, well, I'll never run out. And then of course, 2 days later, you're like,
where did it all go?
Exactly. Yep. And so I think that was like a moment that I really kind of realized what was going on. But at the same time, I had created so much of a confusion around what my issue was, that it was almost a relief to be like, well, maybe this is just one thing that's wrong with me. Maybe I don't have all these other problems. Maybe I'm not, really fucked up in a permanent way. Maybe if I apply myself and I solve this problem, maybe I can be happy or productive or, a good person or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you fishing throughout any of this time?
Yeah.
When you were using?
I grew up fly fishing. So
yeah. And so even during your worst times using, you were still fly fishing?
Yeah, I definitely, it pulls a lot of attention away from fishing, to be that bucked up. I would say by the end, I was fishing less and less. But then when I got clean, I started fishing, more and more. But
what was the crux? What was the point where you're like, I have a problem and I got to get clean. I need to get past this.
Well, it was really embarrassing because this is a small community down here. Everyone knows one another. Everyone talks about one another, good or bad. And, opening the shop was something that I really thought was cool. And I felt like the business could be this great thing that was a pillar of the sport and do all these great things. And of course, like any business owner, right, you have this idea. It's like being a parent. You think your kid is capable of all these amazing things, and it's probably more than they're really capable of. But I had this relationship with the shop, and everyone kind of watched me. It's like day 4 of the Gold Cup, right? Everyone watches you basically torch this thing, and you just feel like an idiot. And that, I think, more than anything, was the time that I really realized, hey, I've done some terrible things, and I was really kind of at the mercy of what I'd done at that point. I think that's was the worst of it. I can't remember exactly what your question was.
That's right. How bad did it get for you at one point? I remember I listened to your podcast when you were with
someone asked me that question.
Andy Mill, and you had said on that podcast that you were at a point where your percentage chance of dying was pretty, and getting clean was pretty low, and dying was pretty high.
Yeah. Well, so I just added that up. There's you can find studies on, people who are, certain drugs delivered a certain type of way. What are their chances of recovery? And those numbers are just really low. But the how bad did it get question, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer, because part of me wants to answer that with like a war story of like, oh, this one time, and like this shocking tale of like near death. But I don't think that really does it like justice. I think the answer really for me is like bad enough. And I think that, you know, your bottom is wherever you stop digging. As bad as it was for me, I've seen people like keep going.
Yeah.
And sometimes it kills them, and sometimes that's grace, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes that's worse. And so it just doesn't, there's no moment that you can say like this was rock bottom, or this was the worst thing, or here's how bad it got. It got bad enough for me. Like I'm a pretty tough person if I put my mind to it. And look, we all love to talk about how people using are pieces of shit, and they are, and I was too, but they're tough people. I mean, living that life is not easy. And a lot of people that are using, myself included, have a certain amount of grit to get through being sick every day, trying to cop, trying to live the lifestyle, trying to like deal with the emotional difficulty of navigating. Like you walk into a room and you know that everybody doesn't like you. You walk out and some dude like cashed a check for you. That's advanced, you know, behavior. And so, but it's also, when you give up, I guess the answer is it gets bad enough. And for everyone that's different. I mean, for me, it was bad enough the way it was.
Was there one drug in particular, or that was harder to kick than others, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, opiate drugs are really popular in the media these days.
Yep.
And the reason they're hard to quit is it's twofold. One is they last quite a while. So if you use, you know, a stimulant drug like methamphetamine or cocaine, it lasts a pretty short while. But if you take, you know, opiate drugs, and they're all different, right? But they're all essentially the same thing. They last a long time, and you can develop a habit to them that, you know, if you're addicted to cocaine, you're in a hotel room, you're smoking crack, you've been doing it for a couple of days. Once you finally fall asleep and get out of that hotel room, you don't have this physical need to use that drug. It's more of a psychological sort of, you know, your brain is obsessed with it, but your body is not like dependent on it. But opiate drugs it just so happens that the effect of the drug is exactly opposite of the effect of detoxing from it. So the drugs will, for instance, they'll make you feel really warm. When you're detoxing, you feel cold. If they'll make you feel confident, when you're detoxing, you'll feel really, you know, sort of insecure and like exposed. And so I think it's kind of a perfect storm with opiates, where using them creates a certain experience, and not using them creates the opposite of that experience. So the range that someone feels when you go from being sick to feeling well is bigger and bigger each time. And those are typically drugs that have a very high rate of recidivism from people who are quitting it.
Were you getting the opiates? Were you able to get scripts for yourself for them, or were you getting them from dealers?
No, just buying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully there's a statute of limitations on that.
Yeah, I think
that's when I run that through the legal department.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I'm not worried.
So let's, you know, start getting into when things started getting a little more positive. I mean, like you said, you were fly fishing throughout all of this time. Mm-hmm. And obviously once you quit, you got clean and you started fly fishing more. What role did that play in helping you get clean?
Well, none. I mean, fly rods don't get me clean.
Right.
Catching fish doesn't get me clean. You know, it's funny, I talked to Monty Burke about this a lot. We had a long conversation about like replacement of addiction with fishing and where does fishing fit in. And there's a very linear kind of way of looking at it, which is like, okay, you know, you put the drugs down, you pick up the fly rod, and then you go on to do some things with the fly rod that are noteworthy, and that all makes sense. But it's not really like that. I mean, to me, fishing was something to focus on, and it gave me a sense of accomplishment that I didn't have in my life in general. So I think it was more trying to prove to myself and to other people that I was not just, a drug addict, that I was somehow more than that, and try to sort of identify myself with an ability that I had. But it wasn't like, I mean, I was talking to the director of that film that we're doing this fall about the world record. And he said something sort of in passing about wouldn't it be funny if you didn't catch this fish if you said you thought you were going to relapse, which is an incredibly ignorant thing to say.
Yes, it is.
But it's also funny, and someone that doesn't, and I'm not sensitive about that stuff. But I think that the way he's looking at it is pretty straightforward, as if there's a static relationship between the more fish I catch, the less I think about getting high. And it's not like that really.
Yeah, but
they're related for sure.
Yeah,
but it's more of an insecurity, I think, of you kind of come to this realization. You say, "Shit, I've been doing really bad for a long time, and now I really want to do good, and I have an opportunity to do this thing." And you just look around and you say, "Okay, well, what am I good at?" And you look for things that you're good at, and then you look to get better at them, because it just makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're contributing and you're doing something positive, and people say, "Hey, good job," and it feels good, I remember the first time someone said "Hey man, good to see you." No one had ever said that I could remember. Or when I do something like catch a fish, and it's "Oh man, good job. Great. Good for you." And you're "Fuck, I want more of that." Maybe that's just the addict.
But that's huge. That's huge.
No,
that feeling that, the fishing is what started giving you anything that I think would think at that point that starts giving you a feeling of self-worth.
Yeah.
And starts helping you with confidence.
Yeah. And I think
it's huge.
I think unsurprisingly, I took that to a really to a big degree, I took that far.
Yeah. Since you're going down that road, I mean, we'll switch gears and talk about that, because I think that, let me ask you this. At what point did you start looking to take it to the level where you're at now?
No, I mean, there are certain things in the sport that are look, fishing is hard, and fly fishing is hard. And everyone in the sport's got an ego, myself included, but to one degree or another, we all want to be good at the sport. And maybe that's a really positive, organic thing. We just out of the own, the genuine interest in our hearts, we want to be good. Maybe a little bit of that is, gosh, I'd really want to see where I stack up. Maybe it's the sort of hardwiring of our brains that says, hey, if I catch more fish, I can have more kids and get my genes out there in the world. And whatever it is, there's a desire that we have to get better at it. And I think that I think I just got really honest about tournaments and records are the only way I could do that. And innovation. Someone told me one time, I was having this conversation with them, and I said, there's only two ways that I can prove that I'm good to myself in the sport of fishing, and those world records and tournaments. And he said, well, there's another way. And I said, well, what's that way? And he said, innovation. And that was, I think, something that was really, it stuck with me, and I agree with him.
Innovation in this, how you do it.
Just anything.
How you
if you
fish,
come up with a new approach or a new way to do something, I think that is an undeniable, thing that you've done. But look, there's only so many ways to prove it, It's like mountain climbing, right? I love mountain climbing, bro. Cool. But I mean, that doesn't, but if you do something the fastest, or if you do it without ropes, or if you do it quicker, if you do it without, there's all these ways you can do it. But in that sport, there's 10,000 ways. And in fly fishing, it's there's not as many.
There's definitely only.
There's a handful, And I'm not saying, by the way, that that's all the sport is, because there's tons of experience that exists outside of that. But for me, I wanted that. I really felt the need for that provable thing of an accomplishment, and it meant a lot to me, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. And that's,
Do you think that you start, I mean, I'll call it a laser focus on what your goals that you wanted to achieve in fly fishing and continue to, we talked about it earlier today about what's next, we'll get there. Do you think that laser focus on these new goals helped you also, because you're thinking about all these things now and leaving kind of that bad stuff behind?
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't give you, it started to fill up all your time and all your thoughts, which I would think would help.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that I don't want to rely on that. And I'm going to, if I need something to be focused on, then I'm going to find something to be focused on. And it's going to be whatever's in front of me, you know, whatever the thing is that I'm doing, I'm going to use that as, you know, the object of my obsession if I need to be obsessed with something other than whatever thoughts I'm having. But I don't know. I don't know where it fit in. I mean, to me, my recovery is something that I handle and I work on that by itself. And then that allows me to do this other stuff. But there probably is some of what you said in there too, where it is convenient, you know. But it's helpful. I mean, it's helpful to know when you see yourself improving, when you see yourself accomplishing things you want to accomplish, it tells you that you're on the right track.
Well, I think that's the big thing.
And that gives you like some, you know, and I remember feeling that too, you know, you're like, oh shit, I'm 2 years clean. I'm 3 years clean. I'm this, you know, those are things that like, I never really, those sort of, they don't mean as much now as they used to, but they still mean a lot. And I think it's the same kind of thing. It just affirms that what I'm doing is the right, you know, the right path, as it were.
So what records do you hold? I know you hold the 2-pound tarpon or 2-pound permit record, right?
Yep.
And the 6-pound tarpon record.
Yep.
And I know you hold some more records.
Well, I have a couple others, not many. The 2 and the 4-pound shark record, whaler shark category. So that's not all fish have line class records, and sometimes there's a category of line class records that includes different fish. So the whaler shark category is the fish that I caught were lemon sharks, but it would include I think all members of Carcharodontidae that don't have their own line class record. So it could be a bull shark, it could be a whaler shark, or a, you know, but not a tiger shark, because tiger sharks have their own. It's a little bit complex. Sharks.
Yeah.
I say shark.
Well, listening to your story about, you know, your efforts to catch do the 6-pound, was it the 6-pound?
Yeah, the tarpon record, yeah.
And I think at one point you said you were out there and you fought a fish for 13 hours.
I think that was the longest, yeah.
And lost it right at the boat.
Well,
or close.
That implies that we were like anywhere near catching it. We if we'd had a third person, we would have had a really good shot at that fish. But it wasn't like it was right there. I mean, it was just after 13 hours you get tired, and
yeah. I mean,
time goes.
I guess what I'm getting to is how heartbreaking is that? I mean, at that that's got to be pretty, or is it just business at that point?
I don't know, man. At a certain point, if you're pushing it hard enough, it's a thrill just to be like to have that experience. And I don't think of it that way. I think the record thing to me is like I have a really like deep belief that catching these fish a certain way is what we're all doing as fly fishermen. We're already doing that. We're already saying we're not going to do it with bait. We're not going to do it with a spinning rod. We're not going to troll. We're gonna fucking whip this thing around, and that's how we want to do it. And I always chuckle when people are like, "Oh, I would never fish light line for a fish," and it's like, well, you're already doing it in like 90% of the hardest way possible, and you only do it that way. But that last 10% is just somehow, it's not that I think you should agree with it. It's just that I find it's incongruous, you know? And so for me, like hooking a big fish on line like that it's super hard. It's really, really challenging. It's a lot of fun in a weird, like not fun at all kind of way. But I think that it's like if I had one day left to fish in my life, I would pick whatever record I'm closest to in my like current, like the fishing that I'm doing, and I would try to do that. And it would be more important. I would be fine at the end of that day if we didn't catch anything, because at least I'd be out there trying to do something, as opposed to going out and just catching, a fish that I could more easily catch for the purpose of holding it or looking at it or taking it out of the water. Like, that wouldn't do anything for me.
How big was the 2-pound permit?
16 pounds even.
And the tarpon was
140.3 pounds.
Wow, on 6 pound.
On 6.
Do you have other records you want to go after?
The 4-pound permit record is the current one that I'm really working on. We actually fished 4-pound for a while before we switched to 2-pound, but the fish is bigger, and we felt like we had a better chance at finding the fish for the 2-pound record. So yeah, that's what we're working on now, is the 4-pound permit record.
What's the equivalent of the Gold Cup for permit fishing?
Probably the
tournament,
the March Merkin, I would think.
And you won that one?
Yeah, we won that 3 times.
So I mean, it's I heard again listening to your podcast with Andy Mill. He referred to you as, and I know you'll say that arguably, but right now probably the best saltwater fly fisherman there is.
That just gets me in trouble with all the people who are probably better than me.
Now, I mean, but undeniably, you're one of the best out there right now.
That's like there have been some people who've attached themselves to that, like what he said in that podcast.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I bring it up is
it's fair, because there's so many different ways to do it. Right. I mean, there's guys who are diehard just tarpon fishermen, and they don't really permit fish. And there's guys who are diehard permit fishermen, they don't really tarpon fish. And I mean, to me, it's just such a hard thing to measure,
Yeah, and look, the reason I bring it up is the purpose of this podcast is to, have people on to talk about, who have had struggles in their life or had hard times in their life, and how doing things and have how they've gotten through those hard times in their life. And, for you, fly fishing played a role in that, but also, like you said, it's just your own focus on recovery. But the point is that hopefully somebody who is also struggling will see this podcast and can relate to what you've been through and see where you are now.
Here's one thing that I will say about my recovery and the trajectory of my story, because it is dude, I have these thoughts sometimes, I'll be doing something and I'm like, how the fuck did I get here from there? Because I was there for
huge though.
Every horrible
thing. I mean, look where you are now compared to where you were.
No, it's crazy.
It's amazing.
Bizarre. I mean, there's times when I have to remind myself, all right, man, just stay cool. No one knows you're a fucking drug addict. Just relax. But I will say the thing that I did when I needed the help was I asked people who had been through what I had been through for their advice of what to do. And the key thing is I fucking did it. I didn't do part of it. I didn't say, yeah, well, I'm going to, I asked people who I knew had struggled from the same problem that I had. I said, hey, man, what do I do? And they said, do this, 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 this. And I did those things. And I didn't do part of it. I didn't do half of it. I did exactly what they told me to do. And I watched a lot of people get buried who were trying to get clean around the same time I was, people who were my age, who didn't do the stuff that people told them to do. And it was a really consistent kind of messaging. But that was really, really important for me at that time, was seeking out advice from people who had been through. And I can't tell you how many times my phone, rings and it's somebody, and I know how the conversation, it always happens the same way. Hey man, I want to talk to you about something. And that's something is code for I know exactly what that is. And I'll say, okay, here's what I did. Do this, 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 and this. And if they do it, I get a phone call in 2 years and they're like, dude, this is fucking amazing. But if they don't, then the outcome is different.
Yeah.
So for whatever that's worth, it's fine to talk about the fishing and stuff, but the act of asking people for help who have been through what I had been through, and then taking their advice and following it, it's actually pretty simple. It's the hardest work I've ever done.
Yeah.
but it's simple work.
Well, I think it takes an immense amount of courage.
I don't think so. I think it takes
hard work,
just knowing
discipline.
that you're fucking wrong and shutting up and doing the work.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, look, if you go to the gym and you find like the most jacked dude at the gym and you're like, hey man, I want what you've got. How do I get it? They'll tell you. They'll be like, take this, take that, work out like this, watch everything that you eat, count your macros, and if you follow this, you will be a beast. Maybe you're a smaller framed guy. Maybe you'll be like a little beast. Maybe you're a bigger guy. Maybe you'll be like a big hairy beast. You'll be a fucking beast, I promise you. But if you take that advice and you're like, well, but here's the thing. I like McDonald's on Tuesdays, and I really like to go to a movie and just tuck into a big thing of those little Butterfingers. So I'm willing to do what you want me to do, but I can't go 4 days a week. I can go 2.
For recovery, that won't work.
No, for anything that won't work.
Yeah, true.
If the results you want are serious and important, that never works. Never. It never has, you know? So, whatever that's worth.
Do you think that, you know, you and I were talking earlier, I mean, you are very particular about how you get ready for these tournaments and how you get ready for, to try and break these records. I mean, you're very hardworking. You put tons of time into it. You're very particular with your gear. We were talking about. You were talking about innovation. Do you think you've changed the game in some ways, the way you go about it, or? No,
I mean, I think little stuff. Like, I mean, I'm a huge dork, and so I came up with a knot a couple of years ago, a way to attach the class to the shock that like really only has application for tournament fishing, or if you like care so deeply about fishing with every little bit of your available strength in your class tippet. And I remember the first year that I shared the knot with a couple people, and Dustin Huff won the Gold Cup with it. And I definitely did not win the Gold Cup that year. I think we got to chew on like a wet cigarette butt or something. But I remember like thinking it was super cool. Like I thought that was really neat that he had used that knot. And I think Lewis, Cortez, and Dave Preston were using it when they won. And I think like as painful as it is to watch other people win a tournament that you're trying to win, part of me is like, man, that's really cool. But I don't think that's changing the game. Like that's just coming up with a knot. But I think it's really cool. But I think changing the game is like, the guys who changed the game were like, I mean, Steve Huff, I think, is the first person that made guiding the profession that it could be. And I think Steve would probably, you know, he's very humble and he'd probably take issue with this, but I think he was the first guy that said, I'm going to go from sun up to sundown and do this full time every day of the year. I'm going to fuck it. Whatever you want to do, I'm going to do it. And I think Andy was the first guy as an angler that said, I'm going to be fit. I'm going to show up. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to look at it like a profession. Those guys, I think, changed the game.
Like Tiger Woods changed golf, kind of.
Yeah.
Brought a new, worked harder than anybody else at the time.
Anybody else. Yeah. But I think now, like, there's a lot of guys who are working really hard. And I think we're more at an incremental part of the game, like now. I think changing the game is really kind of overused.
Yeah.
I think it's been pretty picked over, and there's different pieces that are always being added and subtracted and tweaked and made better. But I think those two guys, you know, if you ask me who changed the game, but then you look at like Dave DeLue and Scott Collins, like those guys fucking blew everybody out of the water. They were doing something that other people weren't doing, but they were doing it so much better. And Scott was coming down and winning all these permit tournaments with Greg. And so I think that, you know, those kinds of like seismic shifts I could say are changing the game. But I don't think that that's me at all. No.
Do you still, I mean, do you love tournaments? Do you love going after these records?
Yeah.
Is it just a complete passion?
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think that it would get like a little, I don't know, maybe you'd get, like it wouldn't give you what it used to give you. But there's always other things to do. And it justifies the amount of work that I want to put in. Like I'm happiest if I'm putting in a lot of time and energy into fishing. And just by virtue of doing it for as long as I have been, these are the things that I want to do and kind of are left to do. And so I want to do them. But I get a ton of satisfaction from it.
Yeah. You got to manage your time a little bit more now that you got a little girl at home.
Yeah. Yeah. But I still like going, I mean, you and I are going to go fish tomorrow and just go catch stuff. And that's going to be fun.
Hopefully.
We're going to have a great time. Oh, we're going to catch. It's going to be amazing. No.
Well, what's next then? I mean, like you've achieved all these goals. I guess what's next? We've talked a little bit about it earlier today.
Well, the 4-pound permit record is, I'm doing this film project with an energy drink company this fall, which I think is really cool. I mean, I think they've been really cool to like agree to pay for 2 guides to take me fishing for 15 days for a world record. And then we get to film it. So there's no camera boat, none of that bullshit. We get to do it ourselves. And then they're doing all the interview stuff on their own. I'm doing some design work for companies, which I really like. I really, now of course, all I wanted to do was win the Gold Cup. Now all I want to do is win it twice. But I don't know, I'll figure something out. I mean, I think that the number of like things that I feel like I have to do is definitely smaller than it used to be. But who knows when the next thing will be, whatever.
Do you feel, with the Gold Cup, like something like that, do you feel trepidation at all? Like pressure of shit, if I enter again, I got to win it? No, just in it.
No. I feel lucky to have won it. I feel like genuinely privileged to have my name on that trophy. Some fucking like coming from where I came from to have my name on that trophy. Like if that's not enough, it's more than enough for me to be on there once, and I'll try like hell to do it again. But I'm not a counter. I don't need to do, I mean, I don't know. I've never been that way. It's like the number of permit. We were talking about this today.
Yeah.
Like, the number of permit I've caught is that. So it's just not. It doesn't like do anything for me. I mean, I keep track for fun, but it's not like, I don't have any goal in terms.
You won't feel unfulfilled in life if you don't become the all-time permit catching machine.
No.
Well, I think your story is amazing. I mean, it's a great story. I think, I'm glad I got to see your family today, which is you're amazing. Your daughter. And
you saw a pretty sweet dance party on the couch.
Yeah, I did. Your daughter was
walked right
tearing
into
it
the
up.
Dance party. She looked at you and was like, "Nah, I'm gonna keep dancing." Good.
You've got a beautiful family. You've been very successful with your fishing and with your store now. So it's great to see where you're at. And any last words? I mean, you did have some really, I think, important things to talk about as far as recovery and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, that's really it. I mean, I do, part of the reason that I put myself out there publicly as a drug addict is not for other people. It's for me, it's so that I'm accountable. And so that's part of my story. I don't sit around thinking like, it's weird because people think that they're like, oh, it's so good that you did a podcast or an article and you talk about this and you're helping other people. I'm like, that's not why I do it. I mean, it's great. If someone's helped by it, that's awesome. But I'm not doing it with any expectation of helping people. It's not the reason to do it. The reason I'm doing it is because like I'm an addict and I think being open about it is important to me because it keeps me grounded and tells me it informs myself and the world around me of an important part of my personality, and an important part of my story. And it keeps me in the headspace that I need to be in. As far as, if people are looking for advice, or what I told you before is about as clear and as straightforward and as effective as I can put it. There's like, I've seen people, myself included, that you would never think would get their shit together and become like contributing members of society. And they do it. And it's like, it's mind blowing. But I've seen a lot of people not do that. And I don't know what the difference is between the people that get it and the people that don't. But I can say for sure the people that get it when they ask for people's advice, they take it and they do it. And that is, it's hard to do, but it works. I mean, if you put the work in, like, it works 100%. It works.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Look forward to going out fishing tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going to go catch some bonefish. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathaniel.